Before we begin tonight's stories, I want to thank you for being here. Mr. Hex needs your support. If you enjoy these stories, help us reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel continue growing. Now turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. The smell of autumn hung in the air as I guided my patrol vehicle down Main Street. The familiar rhythm of Ashburn's heartbeat pulsing around me. 7 years on these streets had taught me their every curve and pothole, every shortcut and blind corner. Sheriff's Deputy Caleb Rourke, at your service. Though most folks around here just called me Caleb, Ashburn, Montana wasn't the kind of place that made the news. Population 3,072 according to the faded welcome sign that hadn't been updated since I started wearing the badge. It was the definition of small-town America. 1 main street, 3 churches, a handful of bars, and more pickup trucks than people. The kind of place where the most exciting entry in the police blotter might be Mrs. Henderson's chicken escaping into Mr. Larson's garden. Again, and that suited me just fine. The cruiser's radio crackled. "Caleb, you copy?" Margie Sullivan's voice came through, steady as always. "Go ahead, Margie. Just checking in. Sheriff wants to know if you finished the paperwork on that fender bender from yesterday." I glanced at the manila folder on my passenger seat. "Tell him I'll have it on his desk first thing tomorrow." "Roger that." The October sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across storefronts that hadn't changed in decades. I pulled into Dot's Diner, my stomach grumbling at the thought of Tuesday's half-price pie special. The place was a time capsule of 1970s decor, complete with vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone hun. Dot herself waved as I entered. "Afternoon, Deputy. The usual?" I nodded, sliding into my regular booth. "Coffee black and whatever pie you haven't sold out of yet. Got a fresh apple with your name on it." This was my life now. Predictable. Routine. A far cry from the chaos I'd left behind in Butte. Sometimes I missed the adrenaline rush of real police work, but mostly I was grateful for the peace. The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago. Catherine had taken our daughter Emily to Missoula, leaving me with a house too big for one person, and memories that echoed in every room. Can't say I blamed her. Being married to a cop isn't easy, and I wasn't exactly husband of the year material. Too many late nights, too many missed dinners, too much of the job following me home. Now home was just me and Rusty, a mutt with 1 torn ear and enough shed fur to stuff a mattress. The old farmhouse at the edge of town creaked and moaned in the wind, but it was paid for, and the view of the mountains at sunrise almost made up for the emptiness. Dot set a steaming slice of pie in front of me, the crust golden and flaky. "Heard anything about those missing cattle over at the Robertson place?" she asked, refilling my coffee cup. I shook my head. "Probably coyotes or rustlers. Sheriff's handling that one." 3 cows in a week seems like a lot for coyotes," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "And rustlers? In Ashburn? When was the last time we had rustlers?" She had a point. Ashburn wasn't exactly a hotbed of criminal activity. The occasional drunk driver or domestic dispute was about as exciting as it got. Still, livestock went missing. It happened. "I'll check in with the sheriff," I promised, cutting into my pie. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Sarah Michaels hurried in, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Sarah and her husband John ran one of the larger farms outside of town. Good people who kept to themselves mostly. "Caleb," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I was hoping to find you here." I gestured to the seat across from me. "Everything okay, Sarah?" She slid into the booth, hands fidgeting with her coat buttons. "It's probably nothing, but John's been hearing noises out by the south field. Last night something spooked the cattle so bad they broke through the fence. Found one of them this morning, torn up something awful." "Mountain lion, maybe?" I suggested, though we hadn't had one reported in the area for years. She shook her head firmly. "John's been farming that land his whole life. Says he's never seen anything like it. The way that cow was, it wasn't right, Caleb." There was something in her eyes, a fear that went beyond concern over livestock. Sarah Michaels wasn't the type to spook easily. "I'll swing by later today," I promised. "Have a look around." "Thank you," she said, standing. "John's too proud to call it in officially, but I'd feel better knowing you checked." After she left, I finished my pie without tasting it, a familiar prickle of unease working its way up my spine. In my experience, when rural folks said something wasn't right, it usually meant trouble. I was about to head out when my radio crackled again. "Caleb, you there?" Margie's voice trembled slightly, immediately putting me on alert. "I'm here. What's up?" "We've got a call from the Michaels farm. Sarah's saying something's out in their fields and it's, well, she's not making much sense." My fork clattered against the plate. What do you mean? She's saying John went out to check on something about an hour ago and hasn't come back. She heard screaming, Caleb. Says there's something out there. I was already reaching for my wallet, throwing bills on the table. I'm on my way. Did you call the sheriff? He's over in Helena for that conference, remember? You're the closest unit. Of course. Sheriff Thompson had left yesterday for a 3-day law enforcement symposium, leaving me and Deputy Hayes to cover. And Hayes was working the night shift. Tell her I'm coming. And Margie? Tell her to stay inside. Doors locked. The sky had darkened considerably as I pulled onto the road. Gray clouds rolling in from the mountains. The first few drops of rain spattered against my windshield as I sped toward the Michaels farm, my mind cycling through possibilities. None of them good. As I turned onto the dirt road leading to their property, a distant roll of thunder seemed to underscore the gravity of what lay ahead. I'd patrolled these roads for 7 years without incident, but something told me the peace of Ashburn was about to be shattered, and I had no idea how right I was. The Michaels farmhouse came into view as I crested the hill, a 2-story white structure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Rain was falling steadily now, turning the dirt drive into muddy slush that splattered the cruiser's undercarriage. What caught my attention immediately were the lights. Every single one in the house and barn was blazing, pushing back against the premature darkness brought by the storm. I parked beside John's mud-splattered pickup and had barely stepped out when Sarah burst from the front door, her face pale as bone. Caleb! She ran toward me, rain plastering her hair to her scalp. He's still out there. I heard him scream and then nothing. I gripped her shoulders gently. Start from the beginning. When did John go out? She took a shuddering breath. After dinner, maybe 6 o'clock. The dogs were going crazy, barking at something in the cornfield. We thought maybe it was whatever killed our cow this morning. Her voice cracked. He took his shotgun and said he'd be right back. Then about 20 minutes ago, I heard him yell, and then a sound. What kind of sound? Sarah's eyes met mine, wide with terror. Like nothing I've ever heard before. Not an animal, not anything that should exist. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain worked its way down my spine. Stay here. Lock yourself in the house. But John, I'll find him, I promised, though something in my gut whispered otherwise. Go inside, Sarah. I watched until she was safely back in the house, then retrieved my shotgun from the cruiser's rack. Standard procedure said I should wait for backup, but John might not have that kind of time. I radioed my position to Margie, told her to send Hayes as soon as his shift started, then headed toward the cornfield. The field stretched about 40 acres, the corn standing nearly 7 feet tall despite the late season. John had been planning to harvest next week, according to Sarah. The rain had picked up, drumming against the broad leaves and creating a constant rustling that made it impossible to hear anything else. Water trickled down my neck as I switched on my flashlight, the beam barely penetrating the dense rose. John, I called, my voice swallowed by the storm. John Michaels. Only the rain answered, pattering against the earth in steady rhythm. I moved between the rows, mud sucking at my boots, scanning for any sign of disturbance. About 50 yards in, I found it. Broken stalks and churned earth, like something heavy had been dragged through. My light caught a dark smear on a corn leaf. Blood, diluted by rain but unmistakable. My hand moved to my sidearm, unsnapping the holster. John, I called again, following the trail of destruction deeper into the field. The corn seemed to close in around me, creating a claustrophobic tunnel that blocked out what little daylight remained. My flashlight beam bounced off wet leaves, creating shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. Was that movement ahead, or just the wind? The trail led to a small clearing where several rows had been flattened outward, as if by some massive impact. And there, in the center, was John Michaels, or what remained of him. I'd seen my share of death. Car accidents, bar fights gone wrong, even a hunting accident where a man had taken a shotgun blast to the chest. But nothing had prepared me for this. John lay spread-eagled in the mud, his chest cavity torn open from throat to navel. The rain had washed away some of the blood, but not enough to hide the devastation. His rib cage was splayed outward, several bones missing entirely. Where internal organs should have been was mostly empty space, save for ragged tissue and the lower portion of his intestines, which spilled from the cavity like obscene rope. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. Jesus Christ, no animal I knew could do this. Not a mountain lion, not a bear. This was methodical, almost surgical in its precision. His limbs were intact, his face frozen in a mask of terror, eyes staring sightlessly at the stormy sky. As I fought to control my stomach, a sound cut through the rainfall, a wet, slithering noise, followed by a low, guttural huff. My head snapped up, flashlight beam darting between the corn rows. There. Movement. Something large shifting between the stalks about 20 yards away. Police! Don't move! I shouted, drawing my sidearm and aiming toward the disturbance. The stalks parted, and what emerged froze my blood. It walked on 4 legs, but that's where any resemblance to a normal animal ended. Its body was the size of a large bear, but the proportions were all wrong. Shoulders too high, back sloping sharply downward. Its skin was a patchwork, mostly covered in matted fur that might once have been tawny, but interspersed with sections of bare grayish hide that glistened wetly in my flashlight beam. The head was elongated like a mountain lion's, but the jaw hung wrong, as if partially detached, revealing rows of teeth too numerous and jagged to belong to any natural predator. But it was the eyes that hit me hardest, milky white with no visible pupils and unmistakably intelligent. They fixed on me with predatory focus, calculating. For one eternal second we stared at each other, the only sounds the drumming rain and my thundering heartbeat. Then it charged. I fired, the sound explosive in the confined space. The creature jerked but didn't slow, covering ground with terrifying speed. I fired again and again, the muzzle flash illuminating its grotesque features in strobe-like bursts. It hit me like a freight train, knocking me backward into the corn. Pain exploded in my side as claws raked through my jacket and into flesh. My back slammed against mud, knocking the wind from my lungs. The creature's face hovered inches from mine, hot breath smelling of copper and decay. Those blind-looking eyes stared down, jaws opening to reveal a maw that could easily remove my face in one bite. Desperation gave me strength. I pressed my gun directly against its throat and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening, point blank. A geyser of dark fluid erupted from the wound, spattering my face with burning heat. The creature reared back, a high-pitched shriek emanating from its damaged throat. I scrambled backward through mud, firing again and again until my magazine was empty. The creature staggered, its movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Black fluid poured from multiple wounds, steaming in the cool rain. It made a sound, not a growl or roar, but a series of clicking noises like someone rapidly snapping their fingers. Then it collapsed, massive body hitting the ground with enough force to shake the earth beneath me. I lay there for what felt like hours, rain washing over me, mingling with blood, mine and the creature's. Pain pulsed from my side, and I could feel warmth spreading beneath my uniform. When I finally found the strength to move, I crawled to John's body, knowing it was futile but needing to check anyway. No pulse. His skin was already cool to the touch. My radio had been crushed in the attack. Clutching my side, I staggered back toward the house, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder. The creature hadn't moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those milky eyes were still watching me. Even in death, Sarah was waiting on the porch, shotgun in hand. When she saw me emerge from the field, covered in blood and mud, her face crumpled. "John?" she asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. I shook my head. "Call 911, I managed. Tell them we need everyone, and an ambulance." "What was it?" she whispered as she helped me inside. "What did this?" I slumped against the wall, leaving a smear of mud and blood. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." And as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by throbbing pain and the beginning of shock, one thought kept circling in my mind. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong in our world, and I had a sinking feeling it wasn't alone. The next morning dawned with the harsh fluorescent reality of St. Mary's Hospital in Livingston, 40 miles from Ashburn. 6 stitches closed the gash in my side, and according to the doctor, I was lucky. The creature's claws had missed anything vital, though I'd lost enough blood to earn me an overnight stay and a stern lecture about getting rest. Rest was the last thing on my mind as Sheriff Thompson entered my room, his face grim beneath his salt and pepper mustache. A stocky man in his 50s, Thompson had been sheriff since before I arrived in Ashburn, his forearms perpetually tanned from a lifetime outdoors. "You look like hell, Rourke," he said by way of greeting. "Thanks, boss. Feels worse." He pulled a chair alongside the bed. "Want to tell me what happened out there? Because I've got a farm crawling with state police and wildlife officials, a body in the morgue that looks like it went through a wood chipper, and something in a containment truck that nobody can identify." I recounted the events at the Michaels farm as precisely as I could, including every detail of the creature. Thompson listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. "If anyone but you told me this story, I'd have them committed," he said finally. "But you're not one for tall tales. What are they saying it is?" Thompson shook his head. "Nobody knows. Wildlife Service is calling it an unidentified predator, probably some kind of mutated mountain lion, But between you and me, those boys are spooked. Never seen anything like it. It wasn't natural, I said quietly. You saw it. Those patches of skin, those eyes. What I saw was a dead animal, Thompson cut in sharply. Unusual, maybe deformed, but an animal nonetheless. Let's not start a panic over this. I knew that tone. The conversation was over. Thompson had already decided on the official story. What about John? I asked. Funeral's on Friday. Sarah's staying with her sister for now. He stood, adjusting his hat. Doctor says you'll be released this afternoon. Take the rest of the week off. That's an order. After he left, I closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I drifted off, I saw those milky eyes staring at me. Felt hot breath on my face. Smelled that coppery decay. 3 days of mandated rest followed, though rest consisted mainly of pacing my house, downing painkillers, and jumping at every sound Rusty made. The local paper ran a front-page story about a rogue predator killing John Michaels, mentioning only that I had neutralized the threat. The official stance was clear. Tragic but isolated incident, nothing to see here. By Friday, I couldn't take the confinement anymore. I drove to the cemetery for John's funeral, standing at the back of the crowd, still too sore to kneel. The entire town had turned out, a sea of black against the green hillside. Sarah stood stoically by the casket, her face a mask of composure that cracked only when they lowered her husband into the ground. Afterward, as people dispersed toward waiting cars, Dr. Helen Parker approached me. The town's only veterinarian, Helen had been my sometimes drinking companion since my divorce. Her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude a welcome distraction from loneliness. You shouldn't be up yet, she said, studying my stiff posture. Couldn't stay in that house another minute. How's Sarah holding up? Helen shook her head. As well as can be expected. She's not coming back to the farm, though. Putting it up for sale. We walked slowly toward the parking lot, the October wind rustling fallen leaves around our feet. I heard they took the animal to some facility for study, Helen said carefully. Any idea what it was? I glanced at her sideways. Official word is mutated mountain lion, and unofficial? I stopped walking. Why are you asking? Her green eyes met mine directly. Because 2 weeks ago, I treated a horse from the Addison Ranch that had injuries unlike anything I've seen. 3 days ago, Ben Wilson's dog came in torn up so badly I had to put it down. And yesterday, Mike from the butcher shop showed me a deer carcass a hunter brought in that had organs missing in the same way they're describing John's. She trailed off. Ice formed in my stomach. Why didn't anyone report this? They did. Sheriff wrote it off as coyotes or mountain lions. But Caleb. She lowered her voice, though no one was nearby. I've been a vet for 15 years. These weren't normal predator attacks. I leaned against a headstone, suddenly dizzy. You think there are more of them? It wasn't a question. I think whatever killed John and attacked you didn't just appear overnight. I think it's been out there, feeding, growing bolder. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Helen was right, the creature I'd killed wasn't a one-off mutation. It was part of something larger, something that had been happening right under our noses. I need to see your records, I said. Every unusual animal injury or death in the past month. Can you get them for me? Helen nodded. Meet me at my clinic in an hour. As she walked away, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Need to talk. Important. Come alone. M. Only one person in Ashburn signed messages with just M. Margie Sullivan, our dispatcher. I found her at the far end of the cemetery, smoking nervously beside a towering oak tree. Margie had been dispatched for the Ashburn Sheriff's Department for nearly 2 decades, her gravelly voice a constant presence on our radios. She jumped when I approached, hastily stubbing out her cigarette. Jesus, Caleb, you scared me. Sorry. What's so important we needed to meet like this? She glanced around, confirming we were alone. I overheard something yesterday. Thompson was on the phone with someone from the state, maybe higher. They were talking about containment protocols, media blackouts. For a mountain lion attack? I asked skeptically. That's just it. He specifically said it wasn't a mountain lion. Said they needed to locate the source before it spreads further. She met my eyes. Caleb, he knew. He already knew about these things before you killed one. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Are you sure? She nodded vigorously. Whoever he was talking to, they've been tracking something. Thompson mentioned similar incidents in Idaho and Wyoming over the past year. My mind raced. If Thompson had been lying, if he knew more than he was saying, there's more. Margie continued, her voice dropping even lower. They're bringing in some kind of special team. Not just wildlife services. Military, maybe. When? They're already here. Saw 3 unmarked black SUVs headed toward the old Carson property this morning. The Carson property, an abandoned farm about 5 miles outside town, isolated by dense forest on 3 sides. Perfect place to set up an operation no one was supposed to know about. Margie, this stays between us, I said firmly. Don't mention this to anyone else, not even Hayes. She nodded, fear evident in her eyes. What are you going to do? Good question. Department protocol said I should report directly to Thompson. But if he was deliberately keeping information from me, going to him might do more harm than good. For now, I'm going to look into some animal attacks that might be connected. If you hear anything else, text me. But be careful. As I walked back to my truck, the pain in my side seemed distant compared to the growing dread in my chest. The creature in the cornfield wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something bigger, something the authorities, including my own boss, were actively concealing. Whatever was happening in Ashburn, it had been going on longer than anyone was admitting, and if my suspicions were correct, the death of John Michaels was just the beginning. Helen's veterinary clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, its white clapboard exterior belying the state-of-the-art equipment inside. When I arrived, she was waiting with a thick folder of patient records spread across her desk. I went back through everything for the past 2 months, she said without preamble. 17 cases that don't add up. Pets, livestock, even wildlife brought in by rangers or hunters. She laid out a map of the county, marking each incident with a red dot. What emerged was a clear pattern. The attacks had started at the northeastern edge of our jurisdiction, gradually moving southwest toward Ashburn itself. They're migrating, I murmured. But from where? Helen tapped the map near the furthest cluster of dots. This area backs up against federal land. There's an old research facility there. Been abandoned since the 90s. What kind of research? She shrugged. Military, I think. It was before my time. I studied the map, noting how the incidents created almost a direct line from the facility toward town. What's this? I asked, pointing to an area where the dots curved around an unmarked section. Carson property. Old farm. Nobody's lived there for years. The same place Margie had mentioned. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. My phone buzzed. A text from Hayes. Where are you? Thompson looking for you. Pissed, I showed Helen the message. I need copies of all this. While she gathered the files, I called Hayes back. What's going on? I asked when he answered. Hell if I know. Thompson's got state police crawling all over the station. Something about a quarantine protocol. He's been trying to reach you for an hour. My phone must be acting up, I lied. What quarantine? They're saying there might be some kind of disease outbreak. Maybe from that animal you shot. Thompson wants everyone who was at the Michaels place to come in for testing. My instincts screamed trap. I'm still on medical leave, I said carefully. Doctor's orders. Tell Thompson I'll be in tomorrow. Caleb. He seemed really. Tomorrow, Hayes. I'm not up for it today. I hung up before he could argue, turning to find Helen watching me with concern. You don't think it's really a disease outbreak, do you? She asked, handing me a thick envelope of copied files. No. I think they're trying to control who knows what. I hesitated, then added, and I think I need to see that research facility. Her eyes widened. Are you insane? If there's a government cover-up happening, the last thing you should do is walk right into it. She had a point, but so did the growing certainty in my gut. Whatever these creatures are, they're coming from somewhere. If it's that facility, I need to know. Then I'm coming with you, she said firmly. I started to protest, but she cut me off. I've documented these cases. I know what to look for, and you still have a hole in your side, in case you've forgotten. An hour later, we were in my personal truck, heading northeast on back roads to avoid the main highway. I'd changed into civilian clothes and brought my off-duty weapon, hoping we could pass for hikers if questioned. The federal land was technically open to the public, though the facility itself would undoubtedly be restricted. The landscape grew wilder as we drove, open farmland giving way to dense pine forest. According to Helen's old county map, the research facility was nestled in a valley about 2 miles off the nearest Forest Service road, accessible only by foot or possibly ATV. We parked at an unmarked trailhead and continued on foot, the October afternoon already fading toward dusk. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the crunch of pine needles beneath our boots and the occasional groan of branches in the wind. Something's wrong, Helen whispered after nearly an hour of hiking. There should be wildlife. She was right. The absence of normal forest sounds created an eerie vacuum that set my nerves on edge. We pressed on, following what might once have been a service road, now overgrown with decades of vegetation. The facility appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, A sprawling concrete compound surrounded by chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. What struck me immediately was the contrast. While the fence showed years of neglect, the keypad lock on the main gate looked brand new, its plastic housing unmarred by weather or time. "Someone's been here recently," I murmured, scanning the perimeter. The compound consisted of 3 main buildings, a central structure with satellite dishes on its roof, flanked by 2 lower warehouses. All windows were either boarded up or blacked out. No vehicles were visible, no signs of current occupation, yet the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. "Look." Helen pointed toward a section of fence about 50 yards left of the gate. The chain link was bent outward, creating a gap large enough for a person, or something the size of the creature I'd encountered, to squeeze through. We approached cautiously. The metal was not rusted at the break points, suggesting the damage was recent. On the ground near the opening, I found tracks pressed into the soft earth, multiple sets of footprints, similar to those I'd seen in the cornfield, but varying in size. "They came from inside," Helen whispered, following the trail with her eyes. "Whatever these things are, they escaped from here." The implication sent a chill through me. If she was right, these weren't natural mutations or undiscovered species. They were something created, or at least contained, by human hands. Our discovery was interrupted by the distant sound of engines, vehicles approaching on the forest road. "We need to go," I said, already backing away from the fence. Too late. Headlights swept the area as several black SUVs pulled into view, their tires crunching on the overgrown service road. Men in tactical gear poured out, assault rifles at the ready. "Down on the ground, hands where we can see them." The command echoed through the trees. I pushed Helen behind me, raising my hand slowly. "I'm Deputy Rourke, Ashburn Sheriff's Department," I called out. "I'm armed but not drawing." "On the ground now." The men advanced, their faces obscured by helmets with reflective visors. Not military, at least not standard military. The uniforms bore no insignia, no identifying marks of any kind. I lowered myself carefully to my knees, then prone, Helen doing the same beside me. Rough hands searched us, confiscating my weapon and our phones. "Sir, this one's local law enforcement," one of them said to someone I couldn't see. A pair of polished shoes appeared in my limited field of vision, followed by the voice of Sheriff Thompson. "God damn it, Rourke. I told you to stay home." I was yanked to my feet, coming face to face with my boss. His expression was thunderous, but beneath the anger I detected something else. Fear. "What is this place?" I demanded. "What were those things?" Thompson glanced at the men surrounding us, then back to me. "You shouldn't have come here, either of you." "John Michaels is dead," I said, anger rising. "Those things have been killing animals all over the county. You knew about it and said nothing." One of the tactical team approached Thompson. "Sir, we need to move. Protocol is clear." Thompson nodded grimly. "Load them up. Full containment procedures." As they zip-tied our hands and led us toward the waiting vehicles, I caught a final glimpse of the facility through the trees. In the gathering darkness, it seemed to crouch like a predator, patient and malevolent. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the idling engines, came that distinctive clicking sound I'd heard in the cornfield. My worst fears were confirmed. The creature I'd killed wasn't alone, and whatever conspiracy we'd stumbled into ran far deeper than I'd imagined. The black SUV smelled of new leather and gun oil, its windows tinted so dark the forest outside was reduced to vague shadows. Helen sat beside me, our shoulders touching, her face pale but composed. 2 armed men occupied the front seats, silent as statues. "Where are you taking us?" I asked for the 3rd time. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Containment facility. That's all you need to know." "Those things that escaped? What are they?" No answer. We drove for what felt like hours but was probably less than 40 minutes, finally turning onto a bumpy access road that led to a clearing. In the headlights' glare, I recognized our location with a jolt. The Carson property. What I had assumed was an abandoned farmhouse now swarmed with activity. Floodlights mounted on temporary poles, military-style tents erected in neat rows, personnel in hazmat suits moving purposefully between stations. The SUV stopped outside a large tent marked with biohazard symbols. We were escorted inside, where technicians in full protective gear directed us to separate decontamination stations. Despite my protests, they confiscated our clothes, subjected us to chemical showers, and issued sterile jumpsuits before leading us to a partitioned area containing 2 cots. "You'll remain in quarantine for 24 hours, a voice announced through an intercom. "Standard procedure following potential exposure." "Exposure to what?" Helen demanded, but the speaker had already clicked off. We sat side by side on one of the cots, the thin mattress sagging beneath our weight. Outside our partitioned area, we could hear the constant movement of personnel, the beep of electronic equipment, hushed conversations just beyond comprehension. They can't just detain us, Helen whispered. We have rights. I gave her a grim smile. I think we've moved beyond normal jurisdiction. Black Ops doesn't exactly follow the Constitution. What do you think those creatures are? Genetic experiments? Before I could answer, the partition flap opened, and Sheriff Thompson entered, accompanied by a tall woman in a white lab coat. Thompson looked exhausted, deep lines bracketing his mouth. The woman carried a tablet, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Dr. Eliza Chambers, Department of Defense. She introduced herself crisply. You two have created quite a problem for our containment operation. Your containment operation got John Michaels killed, I retorted, along with who knows how many animals in the county. Thompson winced visibly, but Chambers remained impassive. We were tracking the subjects. The situation was under control until you interfered. Under control? Helen's voice rose incredulously. That thing nearly disemboweled Caleb. It tore John apart like he was tissue paper. And now you're going to tell us exactly what that thing was, I added. No more bullshit. Chambers studied us for a long moment, then sighed. You've seen too much to be simply contained. Sheriff Thompson has vouched for your discretion, though his judgment is suspect given recent events. She tapped her tablet, bringing up an image that turned my blood to ice. The creature I'd killed, laid out on what appeared to be an autopsy table. In death, its wrongness was even more apparent. Its proportions and features a nightmare collage of different animals. We call them chimeras, Chambers said. Hybridized organisms combining genetic material from multiple species. You created them? Helen asked, horror evident in her voice. Not us. The original research began in the late 1980s, utilizing primitive genetic engineering techniques to explore cross-species compatibility for medical applications. The program was officially terminated in 1992 after complications, meaning they got out of control, I translated. Chambers' mouth tightened. The specimens were euthanized, the facility decommissioned. At least, that was what we believed until 18 months ago, when reports of unusual predator activity began emerging in Idaho. She swiped to another image, a map similar to the one Helen had created, but covering 3 states, with incident clusters radiating outward from the old research facility. Someone resumed the work, Thompson interjected, off the books, using the original research but with modern CRISPR technology. We don't know who yet, but they apparently abandoned the site about 2 months ago, leaving their specimens behind, I finished grimly. Chambers nodded. The creatures were contained within the facility, but some broke free approximately 6 weeks ago. They're pack hunters, highly intelligent with accelerated growth rates and extraordinary adaptability. The one you killed was a juvenile. The implications hit me like a physical blow. A juvenile? It was the size of a bear. Adult specimens are considerably larger and far more dangerous. Helen leaned forward. How many are we talking about? Based on tracking data, we believe at least 7 escaped initially. You eliminated 1. We've captured 2 others alive. The rest remain at large. And you've been, what, just watching them kill? I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. Thompson bristled. We've been trying to contain them without causing panic. These things are beyond our normal capabilities, Rourke. We needed specialized personnel, equipment. While you waited, John Michaels died, I said flatly. An uncomfortable silence fell. Chambers finally broke it, her voice clinical. The chimeras are drawn to larger prey as they mature. They started with smaller animals but have progressed to cattle, horses, humans. Their territorial range expands daily. If we don't eliminate them soon, Ashburn itself could become hunting ground. That's why you're quarantining us, Helen realized. You're going to sterilize the area. Take them all out at once. Chambers didn't deny it. We have a containment perimeter established. Once we confirm the location of the remaining subjects, we'll deploy a specialized neurotoxin that targets their unique nervous system. And this toxin won't affect humans or normal wildlife? I asked skeptically. Minimal collateral damage is anticipated. The coldness of her assessment sent a chill through me. Minimal damage? Like Sarah Michaels' husband? Like my deputy who nearly got torn apart? Unfortunate but unavoidable casualties, Chambers replied. The alternative would be far worse. I stood, ignoring the pain in my side. Let us help. Helen knows animal behavior better than anyone, and I know this territory. We can track them more effectively than your teams. Thompson shook his head emphatically. Absolutely not. You're civilians in this operation, Rourke. You stay put. But Chambers was considering it, her analytical mind clearly weighing the potential benefits. Your assistance could expedite the location process. Time is a factor. The longer we wait, the further they range. Eliza, you can't be serious, Thompson protested. I'm entirely serious, Sheriff. Your deputy has already proven he can engage one successfully, and Dr. Parker's expertise could be valuable. She fixed us with a penetrating stare. But understand this, if you assist, you become part of the operation. Full confidentiality, no exceptions. What happened here never leaves this quarantine zone. Helen and I exchanged glances. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Either help them eliminate the threat, or sit helplessly while more people died. We're in, I said, on one condition. Sarah Michaels gets the truth, not some sanitized story about mountain lions. She deserves to know what really killed her husband. Chambers considered this, then gave a curt nod. Acceptable, with appropriate non-disclosure agreements. We mobilize at dawn. After they left, Helen and I sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what we'd learned. These weren't natural predators or even escaped zoo animals. They were manufactured monsters, creatures that should never have existed, created through human arrogance and abandoned through human carelessness. Do you think they'll actually destroy all of them? Helen finally asked. They'll try. Whether they'll succeed. I left the thought unfinished. Dawn came too quickly. We were issued tactical gear, communication devices, and briefed on the Chimera's known behaviors and weaknesses. The creatures had excellent night vision but poor heat regulation, making them most vulnerable during the warmest part of the day. They communicated through subsonic vocalizations, the clicking sounds I'd heard, and possessed uncanny intelligence, capable of basic problem-solving and coordinated hunting strategies. Our role was straightforward. Accompany one of 4 tracking teams to locate the remaining chimeras so they could be tagged with GPS transmitters. Once all subjects were tagged, the neurotoxin would be deployed simultaneously across their locations. Helen and I were paired with a taciturn Special Forces operator who introduced himself only as Jackson and a biologist named Dr. Chen. We were assigned the southeastern quadrant of the search grid, which included part of the Carson property and extended toward the Michaels farm. The October morning was crisp, dew glistening on fallen leaves as our team moved through dense undergrowth. Dr. Chen carried a tablet displaying thermal imagery of the area, while Jackson led with a specialized rifle loaded with tranquilizer darts. Helen and I followed, scanning for signs of disturbance or tracks. There, Helen whispered around midday, pointing to a partially devoured deer carcass. The kill was fresh, blood still seeping into the forest floor. Unlike normal predator kills, the deer's organs had been selectively removed, the rest left intact. They're evolving their feeding patterns, Dr. Chen murmured, taking samples, becoming more efficient. Jackson checked the tracking device on his wrist. 2 heat signatures, large-bodied, moving northeast. Half-mile, maybe less. We followed cautiously, keeping downwind. The forest had fallen silent again, that eerie absence of wildlife that signaled the Chimera's presence. My hand kept straying to my sidearm, remembering the creature's terrifying speed in the cornfield. We crossed a small stream, the water running red with blood. Another kill, more recent. We were close. A clearing opened before us, surrounded by ancient pines. And there, in a patch of sunlight, were 2 chimeras. Larger than the one I'd encountered, their mottled fur sleeker, their movements more fluid. They were feeding on something I couldn't immediately identify, their massive heads buried in torn flesh. Jackson raised his rifle, sighting carefully. Stand by for. The radio at his belt crackled loudly. Both creatures' heads snapped up, those milky eyes instantly fixing on our position. Everything happened in terrifying slow motion. Jackson fired, the tranquilizer dart finding its mark in the larger chimera's shoulder. The creature roared, a sound like metal grinding against stone. But instead of falling, it charged. The second followed, splitting off to flank us. Move, I shouted, pushing Helen behind a massive fallen log as Jackson fired again. The tranquilized chimera staggered but kept coming, foam flecking its jaws. Dr. Chen screamed as it pounced, massive claws raking across his chest. Jackson's rifle barked again and again, the reports deafening in the enclosed space. I drew my sidearm, firing at the second chimera as it circled toward Helen's position. My shot struck true, dark fluid erupting from its hide, but it barely slowed. These weren't juveniles, they were fully mature predators, and our weapons seemed woefully inadequate. Helen scrambled backward, grabbing a fallen branch for defense. The chimera leapt, and was suddenly knocked sideways by a blur of movement from the trees. A third chimera, even larger than the others, had entered the fray, but instead of joining the attack on us, it tore into the second creature with savage fury. The two beasts rolled across the clearing in a snarling tangle of claws and teeth, primordial rage given physical form. Jackson had emptied his rifle into the first chimera, which had finally collapsed atop the motionless form of Dr. Chen. Blood soaked the forest floor as Jackson reloaded, hands steady despite the chaos. "The fuck is happening?" he growled. "Why are they fighting each other?" The battle between the chimeras reached a crescendo as the larger one pinned the smaller, jaws closing around its throat with bone-crushing force. A wet tearing sound, a final spasm, and the smaller creature went limp. Victor stood over its kill, sides heaving, blood-streaked fur rising and falling with each breath. Then slowly, deliberately, it turned those milky eyes toward us. I raised my gun, though I knew it would do little good. Helen stood beside me, branch clutched in white-knuckled hands. Jackson aimed his reloaded rifle. The chimera regarded us silently, head cocked in an almost contemplative posture. A tense second stretched into eternity. Then, inexplicably, it turned and loped into the forest, disappearing among the shadows. We stood frozen, the sudden silence broken only by our ragged breathing. Dr. Chen was dead, his chest cavity a ruin similar to John Michael's. The two chimeras lay motionless, one from our weapons, one from its own kind. "What just happened?" Helen whispered. "Why did it kill the other one? Why didn't it attack us?" Jackson shook his head, already calling in our position on his radio. "Don't know, don't care. We got two of them. Let's tag and move before the big one comes back." But as the containment team arrived to secure the bodies, I couldn't shake the image of the third chimera, the way it had studied us, the almost deliberate decision to leave us unharmed. These creatures were supposed to be mindless predators, yet its actions suggested something more complex. By nightfall, all the escaped chimeras had been accounted for. 4 dead, 3 captured alive for study. The operation was declared a success, the area secured. Helen and I were debriefed, sworn to secrecy, and finally released after signing more non-disclosure agreements than I could count. Thompson drove us back to Ashburn in silence, the weight of the past days settling over us like a shroud. Only when we reached the town limits did he speak. "You did good work out there, both of you." His gruff voice held genuine appreciation. "For what it's worth, I fought to tell people the truth. Got overruled. Will they really keep them contained this time?" Helen asked. Thompson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They've incinerated the research facility, sterilized the entire area. The surviving specimens are being transported to a secure location for study." "And if there are more we didn't find?" I pressed. "Or if whoever created them tries again?" He had no answer for that. Thompson dropped Helen at her clinic, then drove me home. As we pulled up to my house, he handed me an envelope. "Official report for the Michaels case. Mountain lion attack, exactly as stated publicly. Your signature is required." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "And Sarah? She'll be told a modified version. Experimental predator research that escaped containment. Close enough to the truth to give her closure. Not nearly enough, but better than the lie everyone else would get." Rusty greeted me with frantic enthusiasm as I entered the house, his familiar warmth a comfort after days of clinical sterility and mortal terror. I fed him, took a long shower, and then sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, watching darkness settle over Ashburn. The town looked exactly as it always had. Quiet streets, warm windows glowing in the evening, the distant hum of tractors bringing in the harvest. Normal, peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Come by the clinic tomorrow. Need to talk." I sent back confirmation, then returned to my contemplation of the town. From the outside, nothing had changed. The residents of Ashburn would continue their lives, never knowing how close they had come to becoming prey. But I knew. And I couldn't forget the third chimera, the one that had killed its own kind and spared us. Dr. Chambers had called them highly intelligent, capable of learning and adaptation. What if they were evolving beyond their programming? What if they were becoming something else entirely? In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound carrying clearly in the night air. Perfectly normal for Montana in October. Yet I found myself listening intently, searching for that distinctive clicking sound beneath the howl, because deep down, I knew the truth that would never appear in any official report. We hadn't won. We had merely survived the first encounter. And whatever nightmare science had created in that abandoned facility, whatever fusion of predatory instinct and unnatural intelligence, it was now loose in the world. Some monsters are born, others are made. But the most dangerous are those that learn, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Ashburn I was certain something was still learning. I never imagined I'd end up as a park ranger at Whisperwood National Forest. The decision came after years working a soul-crushing corporate job in Seattle. staring at spreadsheets while dreaming of something meaningful. When the position opened at one of America's most remote ranger stations, I applied on impulse. 3 weeks later, I was driving my old Jeep up a winding forest road, belongings packed in the back, heading toward my new life. The Ravens Hollow Ranger Station sat nestled between ancient pines, overlooking Lake Stillwater. My new home was a weathered cabin built in the 1930s, with creaking floorboards and windows that rattled when the wind blew. The isolation was immediate and overwhelming. No cell service, spotty radio communication, and the nearest town a grueling 40-mile drive. "You must be the new ranger," a voice called as I unloaded my gear. A man with a weathered face approached, his uniform faded from years of sun. "I'm Redwood, been stationed at North Ridge for 18 years. Redwood, real name Joseph Redwood, became my first friend in this vast wilderness. Over coffee on my porch that evening, he explained my responsibilities: trail maintenance, wildlife monitoring, search and rescue operations, and enforcing park regulations. What he said next stayed with me. "There are things in these woods the training manual doesn't cover," he murmured, eyes fixed on the darkening tree line. "Stories the locals tell. Things I've seen myself." I laughed nervously. "Like what?" He didn't smile. "The Anishinaabe people who lived here for centuries called this place where the shadow walks. They believed a creature inhabited these woods, taller than a man, covered in dark fur. Modern folks call it Bigfoot." He shrugged. "Probably just stories." That night, I lay awake listening to the forest sounds: owl hoots, distant wolf howls, and wind through pine needles. But underneath it all was something else, a rhythmic sound like heavy footsteps, circling my cabin in the darkness. I told myself it was just wildlife. Bears were common here. But deep down, I knew bears don't pace methodically, and they certainly don't stop outside your bedroom window, breathing heavily before melting back into the forest. My radio crackled at dawn. "Morning check-in from Ravens Hollow. Over." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Roger that, Ravens Hollow. Any incidents to report?" The voice belonged to Maya Black River, dispatch coordinator at headquarters. I hesitated. "Nothing concrete. Some strange noises overnight. Probably just forest settling in with you," she replied. "You'll get used to it." My first weeks passed in a blur of routine tasks and breathtaking views. I documented wildlife sightings, cleared fallen trees from trails, and assisted lost hikers. I befriended Mason Brooks, a Canadian biologist studying wolf populations, and Amara Thornhill, an Australian photographer documenting old-growth forests. But something felt off about Whisperwood. Hikers reported strange vocalizations echoing through valleys. I found inexplicable footprints, far too large for any known wildlife, near remote camping areas. And increasingly, I sensed I was being watched whenever I ventured deep into the forest. On my 23rd day, I found the first body. A hiker, male, mid-30s, who'd been reported missing. Official cause of death, animal attack. But what animal tears a man's limbs off with such precision and arranges them in a circle around the torso? "Looks like a bear got him," the sheriff insisted, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Redwood pulled me aside after the medical examiner left. "It wasn't a bear," he whispered. "This is starting." "What's starting?" His eyes met mine. "The hunting season. It happens every 7 years. That night a storm rolled through the mountains. Lightning illuminated my cabin in strobing flashes as thunder shook the walls. Between thunderclaps I heard it, something massive moving around outside, testing doors and windows. I clutched my service rifle, heart pounding. Then came 3 deliberate knocks on my front door. I froze, finger trembling against the trigger guard. 3 more knocks, louder this time. The doorknob slowly turned, but the lock held. Something slammed against the door with enough force to splinter the frame. I fired a warning shot through the window. The assault stopped immediately. In the silence that followed, I heard heavy breathing, then a low, rumbling vocalization that raised every hair on my body. Not quite human, not quite animal. As another lightning flash illuminated the forest, I glimpsed a massive silhouette retreating into the trees, at least 8 feet tall, walking upright. The radio stayed silent when I reported the incident. The next morning, I found massive footprints in the mud around my cabin, and claw marks gouged deep into my wooden door. Whatever had visited wasn't just passing through, it had come specifically for me. "I'm telling you, headquarters isn't taking this seriously," I insisted as Mason helped me board up my shattered window. The Canadian biologist had arrived that morning, concerned after hearing my distress call over the radio. "Most ranger stations have bear problems," he said, hammering a nail with practiced precision. "But what you're describing sounds different." I showed him the footprint castings I'd made, 18 inches long with 5 distinct toes. Does this look like a bear to you? Mason's scientific skepticism faltered. I've tracked every predator in North America. This doesn't match anything in the textbooks. That afternoon, Amara joined us, her Australian accent carrying across the clearing as she approached my cabin. Heard you had some excitement, she called, camera swinging from her neck. Her expertise documenting wildlife across 5 continents made her invaluable. I showed her the footprints and damage to my cabin. She whistled low. In the outback, the Aboriginal people speak of the Yowie, similar to your Bigfoot. I always thought they were legends until I found tracks like these in Queensland. Together, we formed an unlikely investigation team. Mason analyzed the footprint castings while Amara set up motion-activated cameras around my cabin and key trail intersections. I pored over historical records of the area, finding disturbing patterns. Every 7 years, Whisperwood experienced a spike in disappearances and animal attacks. The pattern stretched back to the earliest park records in 1932. The previous cycle had claimed 4 lives, all ruled as bear attacks despite inconsistencies in the evidence. We were in year 7 of the current cycle. The indigenous stories mention a creature they called Misaabi. I told them that evening as we gathered around my fireplace. The descriptions match what we know as Bigfoot, but with one key difference. The Anishinaabe believed it was intelligent, capable of mimicking human speech and behavior to lure victims. Like how it knocked on your door, Imara observed quietly. A faint pattering caught our attention. Something small hitting the cabin roof. Just pine cones, Mason suggested. We stepped outside to investigate and found small stones scattered across my porch and roof, dozens of them. In the beam of my flashlight, I spotted a perfect circle of larger rocks arranged in the clearing, 30 feet from the cabin. That wasn't there this morning, I whispered. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond our light's reach. Then another, closer. Something was approaching methodically. Inside. Now. Mason's voice was tight with fear. We retreated to the cabin, securing doors and windows. I distributed weapons, my service rifle to Mason, a flare gun to Amara, while I kept my sidearm. The Anishinaabe believed iron repelled the creature, I said, remembering my research. Something about the metal being unnatural. Imara positioned iron tools, a shovel, fire poker, and axe, at each window and door. Whether it would help remained uncertain, but having some plan provided comfort. The radio crackled unexpectedly, making us jump. Through static, a voice emerged, distorted, barely human. Coming for you. Mason grabbed the handset. This is Mason Brooks at Ravens Hollow. Identify yourself. More static then. 7 nights, 7 souls. The transmission ended. When I tried calling headquarters, the radio returned only static. Hours passed in tense silence. Around midnight, Imara's camera alerts began triggering rapidly. On her laptop screen, we watched infrared footage of something massive moving between trees, just beyond clear visibility, staying in shadows. It's circling us, Mason observed, voice barely audible. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted, our breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The fire in the hearth extinguished inexplicably, plunging us into darkness except for the laptop's glow. Then came the mimicry. Help me, please. A perfect imitation of a child's voice called from the forest edge. I'm lost. Next, a woman's voice, panicked. Jason? J-A-san. Where are you? Then my own voice, repeated verbatim from my radio check that morning. It's trying to draw us out, Imara whispered, clutching her camera like a talisman. The voices continued for hours, a grotesque concert of human distress and mundane conversations, all harvested from previous victims and our own communications. When dawn finally broke, we ventured outside cautiously. The stone circle had been transformed into a spiral pattern. At its center lay a deer carcass, fresh, with surgical precision to its dismemberment. Most disturbing was what we found on my cabin wall, a crude symbol painted in what appeared to be deer blood. It resembled a human figure with elongated limbs. It's marking territory, Mason suggested, or leaving a warning. Imara reviewed her camera footage in daylight, finding one frame that made us gasp collectively. For a single moment, one camera had captured our visitor, a massive, fur-covered figure standing upright at the forest edge. Its face remained shadowed, but its proportions were unmistakably non-human. We need to report this to headquarters, I insisted. And tell them what? Mason countered. That Bigfoot is hunting us? They'll think we've gone mad from isolation. Then we gather evidence, Imara decided. Irrefutable proof. The caves, I suggested, remembering park maps. Local legends say the creature retreats to the Whispering Caves during daylight. The decision was made. We would venture to the caves, a 5-mile hike through dense forest to gather evidence. What we didn't realize was that this was exactly what it wanted. We were walking directly into its trap. The Whispering Caves earned their name from the eerie acoustics. Even a whisper at the entrance echoed throughout the limestone labyrinth. We set out at midday, figuring sunlight offered some protection based on the creature's nocturnal activities. Park records show these caves were declared off-limits to visitors in 1967, I explained as we hiked, consulting my topographical map. The official reason was unstable formations, but I found internal memos suggesting multiple rangers reported unusual findings inside. What kind of findings? Imara adjusted her pack, containing camera equipment. They don't specify. The reports were sealed by the regional director. Mason carried a tranquilizer rifle alongside scientific collection tools. His specialty tracking wolves seemed tragically inadequate for what we pursued, but his methodical approach kept us grounded. If this is a biological entity, it has needs. Water, food, shelter. The caves would provide 2 of those, he reasoned. The forest grew denser and darker as we approached the mountain base where the caves nestled. Wildlife sounds diminished until our footsteps became the only noise. No birds called, no insects buzzed. The unnatural silence pressed against my ears. Everything's avoiding this area, Imara whispered, documenting the phenomenon. We found the first anomaly 2 miles in, a massive oak tree, its trunk and branches interwoven with animal bones and antlers. The macabre structure towered above surrounding vegetation. Some predators create territory markers, Mason suggested. Though his scientific certainty had faded, this isn't natural behavior for any known species, I countered, photographing the grim totem. Beyond the bone tree, we discovered more disturbing signs. Trees scarred with claw marks 8 feet above ground level. Half-eaten animal remains positioned in unnatural poses. And most alarmingly, items belonging to missing hikers arranged in precise patterns across the forest floor. A backpack. A hiking boot with foot bones inside. A camera with its memory card removed. This is evidence of intelligence, Imara whispered. Calculated displays meant to intimidate. We should have turned back then. Every instinct screamed danger, but we pressed on, driven by the need for answers and proof. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, a gaping maw in the mountainside, partially concealed by hanging vines. Cool air flowed outward, carrying a pungent, musky odor. That smell! Mason covered his nose. Reminiscent of great apes, but more intense. We activated headlamps and entered cautiously. The limestone passages wound downward, widening into chambers where stalactites hung like stone teeth. Our lights revealed primitive paintings on the walls, ochre and charcoal images depicting tall, hunched figures alongside smaller human forms. These look ancient, Imara photographed extensively, but some appear remarkably fresh. In the 3rd chamber, we found evidence of habitation, a nest-like arrangement of branches, leaves, and fabric torn from human clothing. Surrounding it were hundreds of personal items, watches, jewelry, wallets, hiking equipment, and, disturbingly, a collection of ranger badges dating back decades. I recognized one immediately. This belonged to Ranger Coda Stevens. He disappeared in these woods in 2017. Mason examined scratch marks along the cave walls, notches grouped in 7s. It's keeping count, he realized. 7 victims every 7 years. A low rumble vibrated through the cavern. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. We froze as pebbles dislodged from the ceiling. That came from deeper inside, Imara whispered, camera rolling. We should have retreated. Instead, we advanced deeper, passing through a narrow passage that opened into an immense central chamber. What we found stopped us cold. Human remains. Dozens of skeletons arranged in concentric circles around a central stone formation resembling an altar. Some bones were decades old, others disturbingly fresh. This isn't predatory behavior, I whispered. This is ritual. A shadow moved across the far wall, massive and upright. Our headlamps caught nothing when we turned, but the sensation of being watched intensified. We need to leave, Mason urged. Now, as we turned to retreat, a boulder crashed down, blocking our entry passage. Not fallen, placed. The darkness seemed to thicken around us as our headlamps simultaneously dimmed. A vocalization echoed through the chamber. A complex series of clicks, growls, and something approximating syllables. Then English, distorted through an inhuman throat. 7 nights. 7 souls. We ran, finding another passage leading upward. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind us, heavy footfalls gaining speed, accompanied by rock being scraped by powerful claws. We emerged from a different cave opening a quarter-mile from our entry point. Daylight had never looked so beautiful, though the sun was already descending toward the horizon. It hurted us, Mason gasped as we ran through the forest. It could have attacked in the darkness, but drove us out instead. Why? Imara questioned. Reviewing footage as we moved, the realization hit me like ice water. It's not hunting just for food. It's hunting for sport. And night is falling. We increased our pace, but the forest had transformed around us. Landmarks I recognized appeared in wrong locations. Trails veered in impossible directions. We're going in circles, Imara realized after the third time we passed the same distinctive boulder. It's manipulating the forest somehow, I said. Or our perception of it. The sun touched the horizon, painting the woods blood red. We were still 3 miles from my cabin, with darkness approaching rapidly. From all directions came sounds of movement, branches breaking, undergrowth rustling. It's not alone, Mason whispered, tranquilizer rifle raised. As night fell, we prepared to make our stand, back to back in a small clearing, surrounded by the approaching hunters, and the woods fell silent, waiting for the true darkness to descend. Night in Whisperwood was absolute. Cloud cover obscured stars and moon, creating darkness so complete it seemed solid. Our flashlight beams cut pathetic swaths through the blackness, reaching maybe 15 feet before being swallowed. Stay together. Move slowly. Head east, I instructed, compass glowing faintly in my palm. My cabin lay approximately 2 miles in that direction. If we could maintain our bearing through the disorienting forest, we proceeded in formation, Mason at point with the tranquilizer rifle, me in the middle with my sidearm, and Imara watching our rear with the flare gun. Each step forward felt like moving through molasses, the darkness creating an almost physical resistance. The Anishinaabe believed these creatures could manipulate perception, I whispered. Make you see things that aren't there, or not see things that are. Great time to mention that, Mason muttered. 30 minutes into our retreat, our flashlights began to flicker and dim despite fresh batteries. The temperature plummeted until our breath clouded before us. Around us, the forest came alive with sounds, branches cracking, underbrush rustling, and those vocalizations again. Complicated patterns of clicks, whoops, and guttural tones. They're communicating, Imara realized, recording the sounds, coordinating. A rock struck a tree near my head with devastating force, splintering bark. Another narrowly missed Mason. Then dozens rained down from all directions, forcing us to run blindly through the forest. We broke through into a small clearing and found ourselves standing before a familiar sight. The bone tree we'd discovered earlier. Somehow we'd been turned around completely. Impossible. I checked my compass. The needle spun wildly, rendering it useless. They're hurting us again, Mason concluded grimly. A thunderous impact shook the ground as something massive landed 20 yards away, dropping from the canopy above. Our lights caught only glimpses. Massive limbs, dark fur, a shape at least 8 feet tall moving with uncanny speed behind the tree line. More impacts followed as shapes descended from above, surrounding our position. Run! I shouted, firing my sidearm into the darkness. We fled blindly, separating in the chaos. The sounds of pursuit focused on me, heavy footfalls, and that horrible almost speech following close behind. I crashed through underbrush, branches whipping my face, lungs burning as I pushed beyond exhaustion. A root caught my foot, sending me sprawling into a ravine. I tumbled down the slope, landing hard at the bottom. Pain lanced through my leg, something broken or badly sprained. I dragged myself beneath a fallen log, extinguishing my light. Above, massive shapes moved along the ravine edge, silhouetted against the night sky. They communicated in those complex vocalizations, clearly searching. One descended partly down the slope, so close I could smell its musky odor, like wet fur and something metallic, almost like blood. I controlled my breathing, pressing deeper into the decay beneath the log. The creature sniffed audibly, moving closer. A massive hand, more like a clawed paw but with an opposable thumb, reached within inches of my hiding place. A scream echoed through the forest, Imara's voice. The creature's head snapped up, and it retreated, racing toward the sound with alarming speed. I waited 10 agonizing minutes before crawling from hiding, using a branch as a makeshift crutch. I needed to find my friends, but first needed to reorient myself. Climbing partway up the ravine offered a vantage point where, through a break in the trees, I spotted the ranger station's communication tower light blinking about a mile northeast. Moving as quietly as possible with my injured leg, I made slow progress toward the station. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in my hyper-alert state. Twice I froze as massive shapes crossed my path in the distance, moving with purpose. I found Mason first. He was sitting with his back against a lightning-struck tree, tranquilizer rifle broken across his knees. They came from everywhere, he whispered, eyes wide with shock. I hit one with enough ketamine to drop a bull elephant. It didn't even slow down. Where's Imara? I asked. His eyes met mine. They took her. She shot a flare right into one's face. It screeched but didn't retreat, just grabbed her and his voice broke. It moved impossibly fast, up into the trees. We had to continue moving. I helped Mason to his feet, and we pushed toward my cabin, guided by the distant tower light. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet again. "They're watching," Mason whispered, playing with us. When we finally glimpsed my cabin through the trees, relief washed over us, until we saw what awaited. 3 massive figures stood in my clearing, gathered around something on the ground. As we watched from the concealment of underbrush, they manipulated objects with disturbing dexterity. "They're setting traps," Mason realized. The creatures worked methodically, using tools fashioned from branches and stones. Their movements displayed intelligence and planning. Most disturbing was their physical appearance, now partially visible in the ambient light from my cabin windows. Between 7 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with distinctly non-human proportions, arms too long, legs bent differently, head shaped wrong with no visible neck. "We need a distraction," I whispered. "What did the old stories say repels them? Iron?" I nodded. "And fire." They seemed to avoid light. Using Mason's lighter, we set fire to a bundle of dry brush, then threw my iron knife into the diesel fuel barrel at the edge of the clearing. The resulting explosion sent flames 30 feet into the air as fuel sprayed across the clearing. The creatures reacted with alarm, emitting high-pitched screams and retreating into the forest. We used the distraction to make a dash for the cabin, locking ourselves inside. "Radio headquarters," Mason gasped as I barricaded the door. I tried repeatedly, receiving only static. Looking outside, I saw the communication tower's light no longer blinking. They had disabled it somehow. We quickly inventoried our resources. My shotgun with limited ammunition, flares, iron tools, and enough food for several days if necessary. I activated the emergency transponder, though help would take hours to arrive, assuming the signal reached headquarters. "What about Imara?" Mason asked the question, weighing on both our minds. "If she's alive, we'll find her," I promised, though uncertainty gnawed at me. As if answering our concerns, something hit the cabin roof with a thud. Then another impact. We looked up as dust filtered down from the ceiling. Another thud, directly above the living room. Mason raised the shotgun toward the ceiling. There on the roof, a high-pitched keening sound filled the air, multiple voices creating a discordant chorus that made our teeth ache and vision blur. The psychological effect was immediate and debilitating, like needles behind the eyes. Then Imara's voice called from outside. "Help me. Please, I got away, but I'm hurt." Mason moved toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. "It's not her. Remember the mimicry." The voice changed, becoming angry. "Let me in. They're coming back." Then my own voice. "Mason, open the door. It's safe now." We retreated to the back room as something massive slammed against the front door repeatedly. The windows shattered inward as long, powerful arms reached through, grasping at us. Wood splintered as the front door began to give way. Through the widening gaps, we glimpsed fur, claws, and glinting eyes reflecting firelight like a predator's. In the moment before the door collapsed entirely, the forest erupted with gunfire. Powerful spotlights swept the clearing as multiple voices shouted commands. The creatures retreated instantly, melting into the darkness with supernatural speed. "Park Service, identify yourselves," a commanding voice called. "Rangers," I shouted back. "We're Rangers." The cavalry had arrived, a fully armed emergency response team. As they secured the perimeter, a familiar figure stepped through the broken doorway. "Redwood, told you it was starting," he said grimly. "Now we end it." Dawn broke over Whisperwood as the emergency response team established a defensive perimeter around my cabin. 12 Rangers armed with rifles and tracking equipment prepared for what Redwood called the containment protocol, a procedure absent from any official ranger manual. "Every 7 years they emerge from the deep forest to hunt," Redwood explained as a medic treated my injured leg. "The Park Service has managed the situation since 1932, keeping the public ignorant while minimizing casualties." "Managed?" Mason's voice dripped with disbelief. "People have died, far fewer than would have without intervention," Redwood countered. "We've learned to predict the cycle and evacuate remote areas before it begins. Sometimes we're too late." I struggled to process the revelation. "You knew when you met me. You knew what was happening and said nothing." Redwood's weathered face showed genuine regret. "Standard procedure. New Rangers aren't briefed unless absolutely necessary. Most complete their service without ever knowing." "What about Imara?" I demanded. A grim expression crossed his face. "We'll search, but if they've taken her to their territory," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Operation leader Captain Adina Rivers outlined the plan. "We've identified 3 cave systems serving as their primary nesting sites. Teams will deploy sonic deterrents and specialized incendiary devices designed to drive them deeper into the wilderness, beyond park boundaries. You're not trying to capture or kill them? Mason asked incredulously. Rivers fixed him with a hard stare. Previous attempts ended catastrophically. These creatures are stronger, faster, and more intelligent than anything you can imagine. Our priority is containment and survivor recovery. I insisted on joining the search for Amara despite my injury. Rivers reluctantly agreed, partnering me with Redwood and 2 combat-experienced rangers named Kai and Brenna. Our assignment, the central cave system we'd explored yesterday. As we prepared to depart, Rivers handed me a strange-looking device resembling a cattle prod. Ultrasonic disruption tool. The creature's hearing operates at different frequencies than ours. This will disorient them temporarily, enough to create escape opportunities. Our team moved out at midday, traveling in a reinforced vehicle until the terrain forced us to continue on foot. The forest felt different in daylight, less menacing but no less alien. Evidence of the creature's passage surrounded us. Broken branches, disturbed earth, and occasional blood smears on tree trunks. They're normally nocturnal, Redwood explained as we hiked. Daylight weakens them somewhat, affecting their perception abilities. What exactly are they? I finally asked the question that had haunted me. Redwood's response was unexpected. The official position is unknown primate species. Unofficially, they've been here longer than us. The Anishinaabe called them the first people, beings that walked these lands before humans arrived. You're suggesting they're intelligent, I pressed. More than intelligent, he confirmed. They possess knowledge and abilities beyond our understanding. The mimicry, the psychological warfare, the sophisticated hunting techniques, these aren't instinctual behaviors. We reached the cave entrance by mid-afternoon. Unlike yesterday, the opening was now partially blocked by strategically placed boulders, a defensive measure erected after our escape. Kai deployed a small drone to scout the interior while we prepared our equipment. The thermal imaging revealed multiple heat signatures deep within the cave system, several large forms and one smaller human-sized signature. She's alive, I breathed, hope resurging. Rivers' voice crackled over our radio. Team 2 reports heavy resistance at the northern caves. Multiple creatures, highly aggressive. Proceed with extreme caution. We entered the caves in tight formation, powerful UV spotlights illuminating our path. The passages showed signs of recent activity, fresh claw marks and disturbing arrangements of bones marking our route. The central chamber had been transformed since our previous visit. The altar-like formation now featured elaborate arrangements of stones, bones, and personal items from victims, including Amara's camera and jacket positioned prominently. It's a statement, Brenna observed. They're displaying their trophies, or leaving us a message, Redwood suggested. A faint sound echoed from a passage we hadn't explored previously, something between a whimper and a word. We followed cautiously, UV lights revealing phosphorescent fungi growing along the walls, creating an eerie blue glow. The passage opened into a smaller chamber where we found Amara. She sat against the wall, physically unharmed but in a catatonic state, eyes fixed on the cave wall where elaborate symbols had been carved. Amara. I approached slowly, touching her shoulder. No response. Psychological trauma, Kai suggested, checking her vital signs. Seen it before in survivors. They can induce a fear state so profound it shuts down higher brain functions. As we prepared to move her, a low rumble vibrated through the chamber. Dust and small stones cascaded from the ceiling. They're collapsing the tunnels, Redwood realized, cutting off our retreat. We moved quickly, Kai carrying Amara as we navigated back toward the main chamber. The rumbling intensified, entire passages sealing behind us as we fled. In the central chamber, we found our primary exit blocked by fallen rock. Redwood identified an alternative route, a narrow passage leading upward that might reach the surface. As we entered this new passage, the first creature attacked. Dropping from a hidden recess in the ceiling, it landed on Brenna, powerful hands closing around her throat. The UV light revealed its features in horrifying detail. A face not quite ape, not quite human, with deep-set eyes showing terrible intelligence. Kai fired his rifle, the bullets striking the creature's chest. It released Brenna, staggering backward but remaining upright. I activated the ultrasonic device, pointing it directly at the being. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature clutched its misshapen head, emitting a high-pitched keening sound that echoed painfully through the chamber. It retreated into darkness, movements uncoordinated. "Move," Redwood commanded, helping Brenna to her feet. Blood streamed from claw marks across her chest, but she could walk. We pushed upward through increasingly narrow passages, the sounds of pursuit growing behind us. The creatures had recovered and were gaining rapidly. The passage ended at a vertical shaft with crude handholds carved into the rock. Sunlight filtered down from an opening 30 feet above our escape route. "I'll take Imara first," Kai said, securing her to his back with climbing gear. He began ascending swiftly. Brenna went next, moving slowly due to her injuries. Redwood and I prepared to defend the passage while they climbed. The first creature appeared at the passage entrance, larger than the others, its fur streaked with gray. Behind it, more shapes moved in the darkness. "That's their leader," Redwood whispered, raising his rifle. "The one the Anishinaabe called Misabi, the grandfather." The creature studied us with unsettling intelligence, making no move to attack. Instead, it produced something from a crude pouch at its side, a ranger badge. My breath caught as it held up the badge, then deliberately placed it on the ground between us. The message seemed clear, a warning or perhaps an offer. Leave their territory, and they would permit our departure. "They're learning," Redwood murmured, adapting to our tactics. A voice from above called down. Kai had reached the surface with Imara. Brenna was nearly there as well. "You go next," Redwood insisted, eyes never leaving the creatures. "Together," I countered, unwilling to leave him. As if sensing our intention to depart, the leader vocalized sharply. The creatures behind it surged forward. I activated the ultrasonic device while Redwood threw a magnesium flare. The combined assault on their senses drove them back temporarily, giving us precious seconds to begin our ascent. We climbed desperately, the creatures recovering faster than expected. Powerful hands grasped at our boots as we neared the top. Kai and Brenna reached down, pulling us the final distance to safety. We emerged onto a forested hillside a half-mile from our entry point. Without pausing, we retreated toward the extraction point where Rivers' team would meet us. Behind us, inhuman howls echoed through the forest, part rage, part communication. They weren't pursuing, at least not immediately. "Why aren't they following?" I questioned as we moved. "Territorial boundaries," Redwood explained. "We've crossed back into what they consider neutral ground." At the extraction point, Rivers' team helped load Imara into a medical transport. She remained unresponsive, though doctors later confirmed she had suffered no physical injuries. "Will she recover?" I asked the field physician. "Hard to say. Whatever she experienced created severe psychological trauma. Some survivors eventually regain normal function. Others never fully return." As operations concluded and containment measures were established around the deep forest regions, Redwood pulled me aside at headquarters. "You have a choice to make," he said gravely. "Transfer to another park. Most rangers do after encountering them. Or stay and become part of the containment protocol." "Why would anyone stay?" I asked. "Because someone needs to stand at the boundary. Someone who understands what waits in the darkness." 3 months have passed since that night. Imara was transferred to a specialized facility in Australia, showing small improvements in responsiveness. Mason returned to his wolf research, but in a different park, far from Whisperwood. I chose to stay. My new cabin sits at North Ridge Station, overlooking the deep forest where the creatures dwell. The containment protocols have driven them back to their territory, and the 7-year cycle has concluded for now. Park visitors hike without knowledge of what dwells beyond the boundaries we maintain. Sometimes at night, I hear those distinctive vocalizations echoing across the valley. Complex communications I've begun to categorize and study. They're not just animals. Whatever they are, evolved primates, remnants of something ancient, or something else entirely, they possess culture, language, and intelligence. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I catch words in their calls, actual English phrases absorbed from their victims or our communications. They're learning, adapting, watching, preparing for the next cycle. I record everything, building a knowledge base future rangers will need. The Anishinaabe lived alongside these beings for centuries before European settlement, maintaining an uneasy coexistence. Perhaps their approach holds wisdom we've forgotten. Last week, I found a carefully arranged pile of stones outside my cabin. Not threatening, but deliberately placed where I would find them. A message, a recognition. Redwood says I've been marked, chosen as a point of contact between our worlds. They remember faces, he told me, and they'll remember yours forever. Tonight, as darkness falls over Whisperwood, I prepare for another night of vigilance at the boundary where modern human understanding ends, where ancient shadows still walk beneath the pines, and somewhere in the deep forest, they prepare too. Watching, waiting, learning. 7 years will pass quickly. Deputy Sheriff Daryl Strand, Gold Creek Police Department. That's what my badge says. What it said since I pinned it to my chest in the spring of 1994. Most folks around here just call me Daryl. In a town of 800 souls, formality seems pointless when you've known each other since grade school. The strangest part about being a cop in a small town is that you know everyone. But when something goes wrong, it's like you didn't know them at all. This wasn't what I expected when I first started out here in Gold Creek, Oklahoma, back in 1994. My name's Daryl Strand, and I've been the town's go-to for every little thing, from disputes about cows trespassing on properties to investigating suspicious shadows in a barn at 2 a.m. You learn to laugh it off most days, but sometimes you realize that not everything can be brushed aside with a sarcastic remark or a shrug. Now I'm not one to complain. Life's simple out here. I grew up nearby, in Shawnee, where the biggest excitement was a tornado warning, or the annual festival that somehow always ended in some cousin of mine getting into a fistfight over barbecue. Gold Creek, on the other hand, was smaller, quieter, and up until last month I'd have sworn it was safe. But if you've ever met someone who thought living in a quiet town meant life wasn't dangerous, you've met a fool. Gold Creek sits nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense woods that seem to press in on all sides. Ancient oaks and pines that have stood longer than any building in town. Most days, those woods are a comfort. They shield us from the harsh Oklahoma winds, provide hunting grounds for the locals, and give the kids somewhere to play make-believe. Most days, the station is just a converted general store with 3 desks, a holding cell that hasn't seen an overnight guest in years, and coffee that could strip paint. Sheriff Harding runs things, nominally, but since his gout got bad, I handle most of the day-to-day. My fellow deputy Tracy Wilkins handles the paperwork. She's good at that. Me, I'm better at calming down Mrs. Fletcher when her cats go missing or helping old man Jenkins when teenagers knock over his mailbox for the 10th time. Those woods, though, something about them always put me on edge. The way the sunlight seems to vanish 20 feet past the tree line. The way sounds get swallowed up. The way animals go quiet when you venture too deep. I should have paid more attention to those feelings. It was July 23, 1994, when things started to get weird. I was at the station flipping through paperwork when the call came in. A guy named Reggie Wendell, who ran the local diner, was yelling about his missing wife. Now, Reggie's a hothead. He's been in a couple of bar brawls in his day, so when I picked up the phone and heard him screaming, I figured it was just another one of their lovers' quarrels. The kind where one of them storms off and hides at their sister's place for the weekend. She's gone, Daryl. Reggie's voice was cracking. She never made it home last night. I glanced at the clock. It was just shy of 6 p.m. That's when I realized something was off. She'd been gone for a full day, and Reggie hadn't called until now. He said he'd looked everywhere, asked around, but no one had seen her since she left the diner around 8 p.m. the night before. Did you check out by the lake? I asked. She could have gone there to cool off after y'all had a spat. No, it ain't like that this time. Daryl, you've got to help me. That last bit struck me. Reggie didn't ask for help unless he was neck-deep in something serious. I told him I'd head over to his place and take a look around. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. Maybe she'd gone off to Tulsa or stayed at a friend's place. People do crazy things when they need space. As I hung up the phone, a chill crawled up my spine. Outside the station window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street. In the distance, those woods waited, patient as always, their secrets held tight beneath the canopy. I had no idea what waited for me in Reggie Wendell's house. No idea that by sunset, everything I thought I knew about Gold Creek would be turned inside out. No idea that the woods had finally decided to share their secrets. When I got to the Wendell house, Reggie was sitting on the front porch, shaking like a dog in a thunderstorm. "She's not here, Daryl. I swear to God," he muttered. His eyes were darting all over the place, like he was expecting something to jump out at him. "You call her family yet?" I asked, stepping up to him. "Yeah. They haven't heard from her since yesterday either." I nodded. "All right, let's check the woods. Maybe she's just cooling off somewhere." We headed behind the house towards the tree line. Gold Creek is surrounded by thick woods. There are a couple of small clearings here and there, but mostly it's a tangled mess of branches and undergrowth. The kind of place you don't wander into without a solid reason. As we walked, I asked Reggie more questions. What she was wearing, where she was last seen. He kept giving me the same shaky answers. His hands twitched like he wanted to grab something, but I figured it was nerves. The sun was beginning its descent, casting an amber glow through the treetops. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, and our footsteps were muffled by the carpet of pine needles and leaves. The woods always smelled of decay and renewal, that earthy mix of rotting vegetation and fresh growth. But today, there was something else underneath, something sour and wrong. After a good 15 minutes of walking, we found a path that led deeper into the woods. Reggie stopped at the entrance and his face went pale. I raised an eyebrow. "You all right?" She wouldn't have gone down there," he whispered. Now I'd heard some dumb things in my time, but this was starting to smell like fear. And fear, especially around here, was never without reason. "What's down there?" I asked, half joking. "You got some kind of critter hiding in the trees?" Reggie didn't answer. He just stared into the woods like something was watching him. I followed his gaze but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. It was the same twisted trees, moss-covered trunks, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Reggie, get a grip, man," I said, a bit harder than I meant to. "We're just looking for your wife. You want to tell me why you're so damn spooked?" "I don't know, Daryl," he muttered. "I just got a feeling, a bad one." I snorted. "Feelings don't solve problems, Reggie." But as soon as I said it, the air changed. I don't know how to describe it. The temperature hadn't dropped and nothing obvious had shifted, but suddenly it felt wrong. Like the woods were too quiet, and not the kind of quiet you get on a calm day. It was an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects. Just the two of us standing there, listening to our own breathing. "All right," I said, pulling my flashlight from my belt. "Let's get this over with." Reggie didn't argue. He just followed me, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. We walked the path for another 10 minutes before we found it, the clearing. And in the middle of that clearing was something that made my blood run cold. A shoe. Just one. A woman's sneaker lying on its side in the dirt. "That hers?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Reggie nodded, his face as pale as a ghost. I stepped closer, shining the flashlight around the area. The trees were thick, almost too thick, like they were leaning in on us. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints other than our own. But the shoe, it was wrong. I crouched down, examining the dirt. "No tracks," I muttered. "But that doesn't make sense. If she dropped it while running, we'd see something." "She didn't run," Reggie whispered. "She was taken." I looked up at him. "Taken? By who?" "I don't know," he stammered, his eyes wide. "But I've heard stories. About the woods. About something that lives out here. Something that takes people." At this point, I wanted to smack him upside the head for feeding into some backwoods superstition. But before I could say anything, a rustling sound came from the trees to our left. We both froze. The rustling got louder, like something was moving toward us. Slowly, but deliberately, I stood up, my hand instinctively going to the holster on my belt. I hadn't drawn my gun yet, but I was damn close. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Officer Strand with the Gold Creek Police Department. Show yourself." Silence. Then out of nowhere, Reggie took off running. The coward bolted back down the path we'd come from, and for a second I thought about chasing him. But something told me to stay where I was. The rustling started again, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. It was moving fast, circling me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was out there, watching, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my ground, pulling my gun and holding it steady. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "Come out." That's when I saw it. A flash of movement in the trees. It was quick, like a shadow darting between the trunks. Then another flash, closer this time. My pulse quickened. Whatever it was toying with me. I tightened my grip on the gun, my finger hovering over the trigger. The thing circled again, and this time I caught a glimpse of its form. Tall, gangly, with limbs that moved unnaturally fast. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. But what threw me off the most was the size of it. It was bigger than a human, much bigger, like it had been stretched out and twisted into something no longer bound by human proportions. I'd seen plenty of animals in these woods, bobcats, coyotes, even a black bear once. But this wasn't anything I recognized. It moved like a deer, but with the swiftness of a predator. And the sound? It was like bones cracking in slow motion. I raised the gun higher, aiming into the darkness. "Come on," I said, louder this time. "Show yourself." It obliged. The thing lunged from the shadows, its long arms reaching for me. I fired once, twice, 3 times, but it was fast, too fast. The bullets hit the trees behind it as it closed the distance. I barely had time to react before it was on me, knocking me to the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of my lungs. I scrambled back, gasping for air, but the creature didn't follow. It stood over me, towering above, its head cocked to the side like it was studying me. I could see its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, hear the faintest sound of something wet. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had come. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hand was still clenched around the gun, but my arm was too shaky to hold it steady. After a few minutes, I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. Reggie was gone, no sign of him or his wife anywhere. I forced myself to my feet, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, and I started down the path back to Reggie's house. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. It wasn't human, that much was obvious. But no animal moved like that either. It was something else. Something I'd never seen before. Something I couldn't explain. As I got closer to Reggie's place, the trees seemed to close in around me, every rustle of leaves sending a chill down my spine. The gun felt heavy in my hand, but I wasn't about to put it away. Not until I was back in the light. Out of these cursed woods, I broke through the tree line and spotted Reggie's house up ahead. The porch light was still on, but Reggie was nowhere to be seen. I hurried toward the house, hoping against hope that maybe he'd made it back and was hiding inside. But when I reached the porch, I saw the door hanging open. I froze. "Reggie?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "You in there?" No answer. I stepped inside, gun still drawn, and swept the small living room with my flashlight. It was empty. The kitchen, empty. I moved toward the back of the house, dread settling deeper into my bones with every step. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I nudged it open with the barrel of my gun. The room was dark, but the smell hit me first. Metallic, thick like iron. My stomach churned as I shone the light into the room, and that's when I saw it. Reggie, or what was left of him. His body was sprawled across the floor, his chest torn open, blood pooling around him in a sickeningly large puddle. But it wasn't just the sight of Reggie's mangled corpse that froze me in place. It was the fact that something had been feeding on him. The creature was still there, crouched in the far corner of the room, its long limbs folding and unfolding as it gnawed at what remained of Reggie's torso. I could see its pale, twisted form more clearly now, hunched over like some grotesque, elongated spider. For a split second I thought about firing the gun. My finger twitched on the trigger, but the thing didn't react. It didn't even seem to notice me. I slowly backed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. If it hadn't seen me yet, I wasn't about to give it a reason to. Step by step, I made my way down the hallway, praying I wouldn't step on a creaky floorboard or make some noise that would alert the thing to my presence. My breathing was shallow, barely audible, and every inch of my body was screaming for me to run. But I didn't. Not yet. When I reached the front door, I paused, casting one last glance over my shoulder. The creature hadn't moved. It was still feasting on Reggie, oblivious to the world around it. Part of me wanted to shoot it, to end whatever hellish nightmare this thing had brought to our town. But a bigger part of me knew better. There was no winning against something like that. So I turned and bolted out of the house, my feet hitting the porch steps with a force that rattled my bones. I didn't stop running until I was back in my squad car, parked just down the road. I slammed the door shut, threw the car into drive, and peeled out of there like my life depended on it. And maybe it did. I drove straight to the station, heart still pounding, hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel steady. I thought about calling for backup, but what the hell was I supposed to tell them? That some monstrous creature was out in the woods killing people? That it had just torn Reggie apart like a goddamn piece of meat? No one would believe me. I didn't even believe myself. By the time I got back to the station, I was in a daze. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring out into the darkness, my mind replaying everything I'd seen. Reggie was dead. His wife was still missing. And that thing, whatever it was still out there. But I couldn't just leave it at that. I couldn't just sit here and pretend like this didn't happen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the radio and called it in. "Dispatch, this is Officer Strand. We've got a situation." The response came quickly, static crackling through the speaker. "What's the situation, Strand?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the words. "Reggie Wendell's dead. I found his body at his house." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a confused, "What do you mean dead? What happened?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing. It wasn't natural. There's something in the woods. Something wrong. Another long silence. "Officer Strand, are you requesting backup?" I thought about it. About sending more people into those woods. But what good would that do? If whatever was out there could tear a man apart in seconds, what chance did we have? "Just send someone to secure the scene," I said finally. "I'll be waiting." I hung up the radio and sat there, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was for sure. Gold Creek was no longer the quiet, safe town I'd once believed it to be. As I waited for backup to arrive, I kept my eyes on the woods, watching for any sign of movement. I half expected to see that thing again, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. But the trees remained still, and the night air was quiet. Too quiet. In the distance, I saw the flashing lights of the incoming squad cars. The cavalry had arrived, but as they pulled up beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all too late. Too late to save Reggie. Too late to stop whatever was out there. As the officers approached, I stepped out of my car, nodding grimly at them. "What's going on, Strand?" one of them asked, his face tight with concern. I looked back toward the dark woods behind Reggie's house, and then back at them. "You're about to find out," I said, knowing full well they weren't ready, because no one ever is. The aftermath was a blur. State police came in, crime scene techs started their work, and I was questioned for hours. I told them what I saw, mostly. I left out the creature. Said I found Reggie torn apart, probably by a bear or mountain lion. They seemed to buy it, though the skeptical glances they shot my way told me they weren't fully convinced. A week passed, then another. Reggie's funeral was small, just a handful of folks from town, a cousin from Tulsa and me. His wife's body was never found. The case file stayed open, but interest waned. Life in Gold Creek started to return to normal, except it wasn't normal. Not for me. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing. Its pale, twisted form, the way it moved, the sounds it made, and the way it had just ignored me, like I wasn't even worth its time. Then the reports started coming in. A family dog gone missing. A hunter who never came home. A teenage couple who went for a walk in the woods and vanished without a trace. Each time I went out there, each time I found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just emptiness. And that feeling, that wrongness that seemed to permeate the air. I started doing research, digging through old newspaper archives, town records, anything I could get my hands on. I found whispers, hints of similar disappearances dating back decades. Every 20 years or so, people would vanish, a handful at first, then more, then nothing, for another 2 decades. There was a pattern, and if I was right, it was just beginning. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers and dusty files, when Tracy walked in. She took one look at me and sighed. "Daryl, you need to get some sleep," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You look like hell." I shook my head. "Can't sleep. Not until I figure this out." She frowned, glancing at the papers scattered across my desk. "Figure what out? Reggie's death was a tragedy, but it was an animal attack. You said so yourself." I looked up at her, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to tell her the truth, to share the burden of what I knew. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I was sure. "Just following up on some loose ends," I muttered. Tracy sighed again, shaking her head. "Well, while you're chasing ghosts, we've got real problems. Mary Wilkinson called. Says she heard something in her backyard last night. Wants you to come by in the morning." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Mary lived on the edge of town, her property backing up to the woods. The same woods where I'd seen. "I'll head over first thing," I said, already reaching for my coat. Tracy raised an eyebrow. "It's nearly midnight, Daryl," she said, mourning. "Better safe than sorry," I replied, heading for the door. The drive to Mary's place took 10 minutes. The night was clear, the stars bright overhead, but I barely noticed. My eyes kept drifting to the tree line, searching for movement, for any sign of that pale, elongated form. Mary's house was dark when I pulled up, save for a single light in what I guessed was the kitchen. I parked, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way to the front door. I knocked, soft at first, then louder when there was no response. Nothing. "Mary?" I called out, my hand instinctively moving to my gun. "It's Deputy Strand. Everything all right in there?" Silence. I tried the door handle. Locked. Moving to the side of the house, I peered through the kitchen window. The light was on, but the room was empty. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, steam still rising from the plate. That's when I heard it. A soft thump from the backyard, like something heavy hitting the ground. I drew my gun, clicking on the flashlight, and made my way around the side of the house. The backyard was small, mostly bare dirt with a few scraggly shrubs. Beyond it the woods loomed, dark and imposing. My flashlight beam cut through the night, sweeping across the yard, revealing nothing but shadows. Then I saw it. A trail of dark splotches leading from the back door to the tree line. I moved closer, crouching down. Blood. Fresh. I followed the trail to the edge of the woods, my heart hammering in my chest. The blood continued beyond the tree line, disappearing into the darkness. I hesitated, remembering what had happened the last time I ventured into these woods after dark, but I couldn't turn back. Not if Mary was out there, hurt or worse. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the trees, my flashlight beam hardly penetrating the thick canopy overhead. The blood trail was easy to follow, stark crimson against the leaf-strewn ground. It led deeper and deeper into the woods, winding between ancient trunks and tangled undergrowth. After what felt like an eternity, the trail opened into a small clearing, And there, in the center, was Mary's body, or what was left of it. She lay on her back, her chest cavity torn open, ribs splayed outward like the petals of some grotesque flower. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of pure terror. But the worst part was what was missing. Her heart, lungs, liver, all gone, scooped out like she was nothing more than a hollowed gourd. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't the work of any animal I knew. This was methodical, almost ritualistic. Then I saw them, hanging from the low branches of the surrounding trees, dozens of small bundles. I moved closer, shining my light on one. It was a cluster of twigs and leaves, bound together with what looked like sinew, and at the center of each bundle was a small bone. Human, from the look of it. My blood ran cold. These weren't random killings. Whatever was out there was collecting parts, pieces of people. For what purpose, I couldn't begin to imagine. I was about to retreat when I heard it, that now familiar sound of bones cracking, of something moving unnaturally fast through the undergrowth. It was back. I didn't wait to see it this time. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me I could hear it gaining, its movements quick and purposeful. It knew these woods better than I ever would. A root caught my foot, sending me sprawling to the ground. My gun flew from my hand, disappearing into the darkness. I scrambled forward, clawing at the dirt, desperate to get away. Something cold and wet touched the back of my neck. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. It was right behind me, so close I could feel its breath, cold and rancid, on my skin. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I turned my head, just enough to see it out of the corner of my eye. It towered over me, its elongated limbs bent at impossible angles. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over a frame that was more bone than flesh. But its face, God, its face, where there should have been features, there was only smooth, blank skin, save for a jagged tear where its mouth should be. A mouth filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. It leaned closer, that mouth opening wider than any human jaw could. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt its weight shift, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. Vanished back into the trees, as silently as it had appeared. I lay there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. When I finally found the courage to stand, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk. I stumbled through the woods, somehow finding my way back to Mary's yard, and from there to my car. I didn't go back to the station. I couldn't face Tracy, couldn't explain what I'd seen. Instead, I drove home, locked every door and window, and sat in my living room with my backup gun in hand until dawn broke. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in my career. I spent the day poring over my research, trying to make sense of what was happening. The pattern was clearer now. Every 20 years, a series of disappearances and deaths, always centered around the woods. Always starting in July and ending in September. Always preceded by complaints about noises in the night, animals acting strange, the feeling of being watched. But what was causing it? What was that thing in the woods? I found a reference in an old journal, kept by one of the town's founders. He wrote of the Pale Wanderer, a creature that came with the first settlers, that fed on their fear and flesh. The natives had warned them, told them the land was cursed, but they hadn't listened, and they paid the price. The journal ended abruptly in mid-sentence, the final pages stained with what looked like blood. I needed help. I couldn't fight this thing alone. But who would believe me? Who would risk their life based on the ravings of a small-town deputy and an ancient journal? The answer came in the form of a knock at my door. I grabbed my gun, approaching cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out. "It's me, Daryl. Tracy." I opened the door to find her standing there, her usually tidy uniform disheveled, her eyes red from crying. "They found Mary," she said, her voice breaking, "or what's left of her. And there are 3 more missing as of this morning." "What the hell is happening, Daryl?" I stepped aside, letting her in. "You might want to sit down," I said. "This is going to take a while." I told her everything. About Reggie, about the creature, about the pattern I'd uncovered. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "So how do we kill it?" I blinked, taken aback. "You believe me?" Tracy sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know people are dying, and if there's even a chance you're right, we need to do something." She was right. We needed to act, and fast. But first, we needed to understand what we were up against. We spent the next week gathering information, seeking out the town's oldest residents, collecting their stories. Many spoke of the woods with fear, of warnings passed down through generations to stay away during certain months, of rituals performed to keep something at bay. One elderly woman, Martha Creekmore, told us of a cave deep in the woods, a place where the earth opened up into darkness. "That's where it comes from," she whispered, her arthritic hands trembling as she clutched her teacup. "That's its home." Armed with this information and a growing sense of dread, Tracy and I prepared. We gathered weapons, guns loaded with every type of ammunition we could find, knives, even a few homemade flamethrowers cobbled together from propane tanks and lighters. We didn't tell the rest of the department. They wouldn't have believed us, would have stopped us. This was our fight. On a moonless night in early August, we set out. The woods were eerily quiet, as if every living thing had fled before the approaching storm. We followed an old hunting trail, guided by Martha's hand-drawn map, deeper into the heart of the forest than I'd ever gone before. The cave was hidden behind a curtain of vines, its entrance a jagged tear in the hillside. The stench that wafted from its depths was overpowering, the smell of rot and decay and something else, something older and more primal. Tracy looked at me, her face grim in the beam of her flashlight. "Ready?" I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me to turn and run. We stepped into the darkness, our lights barely penetrating the thick, oppressive blackness. The cave twisted downward, the walls slick with moisture and something that looked uncomfortably like blood. The floor was littered with bones, animal and human alike, and those strange bundles hung from the ceiling, hundreds of them, swaying gently in the non-existent breeze. We moved deeper, each step more difficult than the last, as if the very air was resisting our presence. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and what we saw there stopped us cold. Bodies, or parts of them, arranged in a grotesque tableau, some hanging from the ceiling, strung up like marionettes, others splayed across the floor, their limbs twisted into impossible positions, and at the center of it all, a pit, so deep our lights couldn't reach the bottom. From that pit came a sound, a rhythmic pulsing, like a massive heart beating just below the surface. "Jesus," Tracy whispered, her voice tight with horror. That's when we heard it, the now familiar sound of bones cracking, of something moving in the shadows. But this time, it wasn't just one. There were more, many more, circling us in the darkness, their pale forms flickering in and out of the beams of our flashlights. We were surrounded. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Tracy's arm and pulling her toward the entrance. But it was too late. They were on us in seconds, their elongated limbs reaching out, grasping, tearing. I fired blindly into the mass of pale bodies, the gunshots deafening in the confines of the cave. Tracy screamed beside me, her own weapon blazing as she fought to keep them at bay. For a moment it seemed to work. The creatures retreated, shrinking back from the muzzle flashes and the noise. But then they regrouped, moving with that eerie coordinated grace, closing in from all sides. "The pit!" I yelled, pointing to the dark hole at the center of the chamber. "Whatever's controlling them is down there." Tracy nodded, understanding instantly. She pulled one of the makeshift flamethrowers from her pack, igniting it with a flick of her lighter. The flame burst forth, illuminating the cave in a harsh orange glow. The creatures shrieked, a sound so high-pitched it felt like needles driving into my ears. They retreated further, pressing themselves against the walls, away from the fire. "Cover me," Tracy shouted, moving toward the pit. I positioned myself between her and the creatures, firing whenever one got too close. Tracy reached the edge of the pit, the flamethrower held high. She peered down into the darkness, her face contorted in disgust. "There's something down there," she called back to me. "Something moving." Before she could say more, one of the creatures lunged, faster than the others, its elongated arm wrapping around Tracy's leg. She screamed as it dragged her away from the pit, toward the mass of pale bodies waiting in the shadows. I fired, hitting it square in what passed for its chest. It released Tracy, staggering backward but didn't fall. These things were tough, almost impossible to kill with conventional weapons. Tracy scrambled to her feet, clutching the flamethrower. "We need to end this, Daryl," she shouted over the din. Now, she was right. We were outnumbered, outmatched. Our only hope was to destroy whatever was at the heart of this nightmare. I reached into my pack, pulling out the last resort, a bundle of dynamite, stolen from the old quarry on the edge of town. It was reckless, dangerous, but we were out of options. "Get to the entrance," I shouted, lighting the fuse. "I'll be right behind you." Tracy hesitated, but another surge of creatures forced her back toward the tunnel. I waited until she was clear, then hurled the dynamite into the pit. The explosion was deafening, the shockwave throwing me against the wall with bone-crushing force. Rocks and debris rained down from the ceiling, and for a moment I thought the entire cave would collapse around us. When the dust cleared, the pit was gone, collapsed in on itself. And the creatures, they were still. Not dead, but frozen, as if whatever had animated them had suddenly been cut off. I didn't wait to see if it would last. I stumbled to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my body, and ran for the entrance. Tracy was waiting just outside, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the ringing in my ears. "I think so," I replied, looking back at the cave. "But we need to make sure." We spent the next hour rigging the remaining explosives around the entrance, collapsing it completely. By dawn, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble and a cloud of dust hanging in the air. We made our way back to town in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The woods seemed different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. The birds were singing again, and the air smelled of pine and earth, nothing more. In the weeks that followed, no more bodies were found, no more disappearances reported. The town slowly returned to normal, though a pall still hung over those who had lost loved ones. We never told anyone what we'd found in the cave, what we'd done, who would have believed us. Tracy and I kept our secret, though sometimes I would catch her staring into the woods with a haunted look in her eyes. We both knew the truth, a truth no one else in Gold Creek would ever understand. The strangest part about being a cop in a small town is that you know everyone. But when something goes wrong, it's like you didn't know them at all. I thought I knew Gold Creek, thought I understood the quiet life we led here. I was wrong. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of our reality. I once believed that evil was a human construct, that monsters were just men who had lost their way. Now I know better. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself standing at my window, staring out at the tree line in the distance. The woods are quiet now, peaceful, but I can't help wondering, did we truly destroy it? Or did we merely delay it, force it into hibernation until its cycle begins anew? I don't know. And that uncertainty, that lingering doubt, is perhaps the true horror of Gold Creek. Because in 20 years, when the pattern should begin again, I might not be here to stop it, and whoever takes my place might not believe the stories about the thing that waits in the woods. And with that, Gold Creek became just another name on the list of towns people forgot about. But I remember. I'll always remember.